Hi everybody, my name is Lauren and welcome to the Omnivorous Bookworm. So this is my week 2 check-in for the Asian Readathon. Last week I had finished two I DNF'd one and I had started the third one, and so this week I have actually finished 3 books for the Readathon. The first one is left over from last week, so I won't go into it too much, but it was the Reason I Jump, and it is by Naoki Higashida, and I read the Spanish translation, which was La razón por la que salto, and it's about a 13-year-old boy, and he has autism, he's nonverbal, and he writes his they refer to it as a memoir, but it's really just like him answering like I think 50 something questions, something like that. And I really, at first, I think last week I was a little bit, I don't know, upset by it in some ways, but I realized the more I thought about it, it wasn't his writing that was like a little bit upsetting. It was the way that they worded the question. So I didn't really like how they asked him the questions, because all the questions were sort of geared as like, oh, why do autistic people are doing this like strange thing, or thing that I think is strange. And but the more I thought about it, I was like, well, but that's just the question. If you actually would just like read his answers, I really enjoyed the book. I think it's extremely well written. Like for a 13-year-old to have written it, I mean, it's amazing. Um, that you get a lot of insight into his personal struggles, his how he views the world. And I think as long as you approach it in that way, as like this is his journey, this is his perspective. He's not speaking for an entire huge group of people. It's just, he can't be in anybody else's head. So, just like I can't write a book for neurotypical people or for like all visually impaired people, like he can't write a book for all um, like autistic people. So I think the thing that makes it seem like he's doing that are the questions. Sometimes the way he will word things, he will say like, well, autistic people do this, but I think that's more because it's how the question is worded. So I gave that book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I think it was really um, insightful and helpful to get into somebody else's, like I always love to understand how other people perceive the world, even if it's just one other person. I think it's really helpful. So the next book I finished was The Empress of Salt and Fortune, The Singing Hills Cycle, Book 1, and that is by Nevo. So this was um, a fantasy novella, but the way that it's written, I would consider it like a literary novella. It was up for a bunch of awards, and I can understand why. The writing is absolutely beautiful. The world that the author has it set in is reminiscent of, I think they refer to it as Imperial China. I'm not familiar enough about the history of China's very long history to know like what exactly like time period we're talking about, but obviously it is a fantasy, so it's based on that. But we have like a talking bird, we have a lot of sort of magical things referred to. So it is a novella. It's pretty short, and I think it's like 120 pages, something like that. And the writing style is very distant, very poetic, but also very distant. So I think if it had been longer than a novella, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it as much, because it would have just felt so far away. But because it was shorter, I think it worked. I think the author made a really smart decision if she was going to do it in that way to make it a novella. So we follow Chi, who is a cleric. The cleric seems somewhat based off of Buddhism and how they are dressed and how they do things. They refer to Chi as they, so they're not non-binary. We don't get a lot of information as to whether they identify as they because they're a cleric, like if that's part of the, the job that, you know, once somebody becomes a cleric that they are non-binary, or if that's a personal decision, or if it's both, like people who might identify as non-binary would then become clerics. Like, we don't really get a lot of the world building in that way. I would have really enjoyed that. Um, I tend to think that it has something to do with being a cleric, because at one point they sorry, they meet Rabbit, and Rabbit refers to Chi as she, but then when Rabbit sees that Chi is a cleric, then Rabbit refers to Chi as they. So that's why I keep referring to Chi as she, because in my Rabbit did that, and then I was like, oh, but then I don't know. It's very interesting because it also makes you realize how, with your own speech, how set you are on like saying he or she, and so it's a great practice of saying, okay, no, they, like, and being more aware of that, because obviously you want to respect people's wishes of how they want to identify. So I think it was a really smart thing that she did. I just wish, I love to get more into like the background of the like especially in fantasy, I think religious foundations and religious ideologies I just find really interesting in fantasy or without. So I would have appreciated, hopefully we get more into those in other books. You probably, I gave this book 4 stars, but you might be disappointed if you're a big world building person, or if you don't enjoy literary fiction in general. Um, the book is not going to just hand you the information. The plot, like the reason why I'm not talking a lot about the plot is like there is a plot, but we have Chi and Rabbit in the like present day for the story, and then Rabbit is telling a story about the past, and the story is about the Empress of Salt and Fortune. And there is a plot, like there are things that happen, but it's much more about the tone and the themes. We get a lot of feminist themes, a lot of themes about monarchy and power dynamics and how people end up being treated. Like, because Rabbit is sold by her family because they don't have, I think it's like 5 pots of dye or something like that, something really sad, and she's, you know, treated as a servant in this palace. So we get into a lot of those themes, but it's, I mean, for the length of the book, it's very dense as far as themes. For literary fiction, it does have a really great plot, but the actual sort of tone and the actual pacing is going to be slower. It's much more like we're lingering, describing things. We're kind of given things here and here. It's not like laid out like boom, 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 this is what happens. We are constantly going back and forth. I think every chapter, except maybe the first chapter, we open with Chi and Rabbit. Rabbit's telling the story, and we go back, and then we go back. So it's like each chapter is kind of like used as a frame, or the framing technique is used. So it's not fast paced. It's not a lot of world building, but it didn't bother me personally because I felt like the author knew what she was doing. The author had world building. It just wasn't sort of given to us. So the world feels fleshed out. It feels real. You know, we have, I just wish we had, I really wish we would have known more about the religion. That was like the part that I hope in the next book we get more, because she is our main character, and she is the cleric, and then she has their friend, which is a bird who talks, which is almost, their name is Almost Brilliant, the bird's name. And then they are recording everything in this house that Rabbit is in for the history of the Empire of An, I think is how you say it, ANH. And so that's sort of the frame, and then the story that Rabbit is telling is the actual story that has a plot. The frame doesn't have a plot really. Well, it kind of does. All right, and then the last book that I finished was very different, was Auntie Lee's Delights, a Singaporean mystery, was number one, and it's by Ovidia Yu. And I really, I think it was interesting. I also gave this one 4 stars. So I give everything this week 4 stars, which I'm happy with. Um, it's set in Singapore. It says that it's a cozy mystery, and it is a cozy mystery in the fact that we don't get a lot of blood or like anything on page that is very extreme. But I would say the tone of it seems much more like a sort of classical mystery or general mystery. It has a lot of Agatha Christie vibes because we have this like upper class rich woman, Miss Lee, who runs a restaurant, and she has a servant. She has all these friends, some of whom have money, some of whom don't. We have people from Australia. Like, so I don't know. It just reminds me a lot of Agatha Christie set in like modern day Singapore. And I think that's on purpose, obviously, because she talks about that was one of her main influences. There is character development, but the emphasis is much more on the mystery and the story and sort of developing the mystery and the story. And sort of people, everybody has a secret. Nobody is exactly who they seem to be. There's some unexpected twists and turns that I don't know how realistic they are, but it's fun. Like it's a mystery. You're not like sitting there like, oh, I don't think that would happen. At least I don't approach it that way. The same way I wouldn't approach like the talking bird in the mystery. Like it is, or the mystery, the fantasy. So we follow Miss Lee. She was married to a super rich guy. She was his second wife, but she really loved him. But she got a lot of sort of flack from the society, thinking that like she married him only for his money. He has 2 children from his first marriage. So Miss Lee, they're not her biological children, but she's still dealing with them. One lives far away, but the other one, Mark, and his wife Selena, um, are quite interesting. Selena's very interesting. And then we have some other characters that are from Australia. As far as and then there's other like there's it's a pretty large cast of characters. We get into the police officer. I really liked him. I hope if I read more in the series, I hope that he comes back. He was very interesting. We get a lot of the sort of culture of Singapore. I like that they talk about the weather because it's like really hot all the time. And if you've ever lived someplace like right now where we live, it's not hot, but I used to live somewhere where it was very hot, and like when it is really hot, that's like all you can think about. So I appreciated that. I appreciated all the descriptions of food, which is wonderful. Miss Lee was hilarious. I thought she was really funny. I mean, not like laugh out loud, but it was really funny. And there are some sort of like Harry is one of the guys from Australia. It's Harry, and then there's a couple, and he does like in his internal monologue, he does use like a racial slur for Chinese people, um, and him as well as the Australian couple, as well as the maid for Miss Lee, um, as well as the family of somebody else, make a lot of sort of homophobic references. But it's done in such a way that it's obvious that the author is using those characters to show how ridiculous like homophobia is. So it's not used in like and like, oh, like this is okay to say. No, it's like very much it's obvious. Like there's at no point are you wondering whether the author is okay with those sentiments. Although I think she was smart in how she handled it because she talks about how a little bit. It gets into a little bit of how like, well, they were brought up this way, and how being in close proximity can change somebody's perception, or what exactly people are talking about. So there in no way does the book um, like try to be homophobic or anything like that. I'm sure it's obvious the author does not have those ideas, but there are characters who do say certain things, who do imply certain things about people who are gay. So just to let you know, if that's something that might be upsetting and you just want to go to a nice cozy mystery, you're like, I don't I don't want to feel like people are like being homophobic. But I think the message at the end is good without it being too over the top or too like, oh, we're all friends now. But you do see growth within people that seems somewhat realistic. So I appreciated that, and it was interesting to to see the, because we get the homophobia from the Australian people, and then we also get homophobia from some Singaporean people, and we learn about some of the laws in Singapore that it's obvious that the author doesn't agree with, and then we also get homophobia from a character who is an immigrant from the Philippines, living in Singapore, and she also gets a lot of racism against her for being from the Philippines. And they talk about the diversity of Singapore, that you have people from India, people of Chinese descent, people who have immigrated from the Philippines, and how horribly like she's treated from the Philippines, that even though she's a nurse in the Philippines, she's working as a maid, and she was abused in her other job, but she basically has to put up with it because otherwise she would have to go back home and it would be this whole thing. So Miss Lee sort of brings her in and helps her. So Miss Lee is our like heroine. She's not homophobic. She's not, she doesn't spout any racism or that I remember or anything like that. So, but the it is told in an omniscient format, which is also different from a cozy mystery, which is usually told in close third person or in first person. So it is a little bit strange, but it also works because you get in all these different people's heads and can kind of piece together certain parts of the mystery. Um, yeah, so I would say the mystery itself was not that surprising if you've read a lot of mysteries, but it was still well done. And I appreciated all the other parts and all the other elements so much in the characterization. And it was just fun and interesting and a really unique book to read. That's why I gave it 4 stars. So I think this week has definitely been a success as far as the Asian Readathon. I feel like, especially with the Singapore mystery, I don't think I would have picked that up otherwise because I just probably wouldn't have come across it. So I'm really happy to continue on. I think at this point I have met all the qualifications, but what? Like, why not? I'll just read some more and keep going and see how many books by Asian authors I can read this month. While still enjoying myself. So I will check in next week and let you know how things are going. So this was a good 4-star week all across the board. So hopefully next week is just as successful or as interesting. See you next time. Bye bye.